Picture this. You walk into your favorite supermarket, but something feels off. That pack of strawberries you always buy has suddenly become much more expensive, and as you walk down the aisles, you realize the shelves look emptier than usual. The delivery trucks that normally restock fresh veggies, milk, and bread just aren't coming as often as they used to. And then the really sad part hits you. Some of the friendly staff who always helped you find the freshest produce are suddenly gone because the store had to let them go. So now groceries cost more, there are fewer options to choose from, and fewer people around to help. Believe it or not, this gloomy supermarket scene perfectly captures what happens to an entire country in a period of stagflation. And it's a word that makes economists very, very nervous. So what exactly is stagflation? And how does a problem in a supermarket become a problem for an entire country? That weird word, stagflation, sounds super complicated, but it's just a mashup of two other words, stagnation and inflation. Let's break that down. First up, inflation. This is the part where the products get way more expensive. In the real world, inflation means the prices for just about everything are going up. Food, gas for the car, electricity, clothes, you name it. The money your parents have just doesn't stretch as far as it used to. That's the inflation in stagflation. Second, we have stagnation. This is the part where the supermarket stops getting new deliveries. A stagnant economy is one that has stopped growing or is growing at a snail's pace. Think of a plant that just stops getting any bigger. For a country, a growing economy means companies are making more things and creating new jobs. A stagnant one means businesses are hitting the brakes. They aren't producing as much, and everything feels stuck. This is the stag in stagflation. Now, for a long time, economists thought these two things couldn't really happen at the same time. It was like a seesaw. When inflation went up, unemployment usually went down. But stagflation is when the seesaw snaps right in half. It's the bizarre and painful combo where both bad things happen at once. Prices are rising fast, but the economy is completely stuck in the mud. And that brings us to the third piece of our supermarket puzzle, the helpers who are let go. When an economy stagnates, companies stop hiring. Even worse, like our supermarket owner, they might have to lay off people they already have. This leads to high unemployment. So, stagflation is this miserable economic cocktail with three nasty ingredients all mixed together. High inflation. Everything gets more expensive, so your money buys less. High unemployment. People lose their jobs and struggle to find new ones. Stagnant growth. The entire economy slows down or stops growing altogether. You can see why it's such a nightmare. Things cost more, but fewer people have the jobs and money to buy them. It's an economic trap that's incredibly difficult to escape. So how does a whole country get stuck in this mess? It usually starts with something called a supply shock. That sounds technical, but let's jump back to the supermarket. Imagine a farmer who grows strawberries for your supermarket. To grow those strawberries, the farmer needs a reliable supply of water. But what if, all of a sudden, the main water source runs into a serious problem and gets heavily restricted? Now the farmer can't grow enough new strawberries. Whatever small amount they can grow becomes extremely expensive because even the limited water they manage to get now costs a fortune. That means the supermarket has far fewer strawberries to sell, and the ones on the shelves become ridiculously pricey. On top of that, the supermarket might even have to let some staff go, simply because there just isn't enough to do. That's a supply shock. When a critical ingredient for the economy suddenly becomes scarce or wildly expensive. The most famous real-world example of this went down in the 1970s. In 1973, several oil-producing countries in the Middle East created the OPEC oil embargo, drastically cutting back the amount of oil they sold to the United States and other Western nations. Suddenly, the world was hit by a massive supply shock. Oil is like that plastic for our toy factory. It's in almost everything. It's used for gasoline, heating homes, generating electricity, and making countless products. When the price of oil roughly quadrupled over a few short months, it sent a jolt through the entire global economy. The cost of doing almost everything skyrocketed. It became incredibly expensive for companies to run factories, for trucks to deliver goods, and for people to drive to work. Companies had no choice but to raise their prices to cover these massive new costs, causing runaway inflation. At the very same time, because producing anything was so expensive, many businesses had to cut back, laying off millions of workers. The result was the world's first major battle with stagflation. Prices were soaring, economies were shrinking, and unemployment lines were growing longer. People waited in huge lines just to get gas for their cars. It proved the old economic rulebook, which said high inflation and high unemployment shouldn't happen together, was wrong. So, why does the word stagflation cause so much panic for the people in charge of the economy? Because it puts them in a situation where every solution makes another problem worse. Normally, the central bank can handle economic problems pretty easily by adjusting interest rates. If inflation is too high, they raise rates. Borrowing becomes expensive, people spend less, businesses slow down, and price growth eventually cools. If the economy is weak and unemployment is rising, they cut rates. Borrowing becomes cheaper, companies invest more, people buy more, and growth picks up. But during stagflation, both problems happen at the same time. Prices keep rising and the economy is already weak. So if they raise rates to fight inflation, they hit the economy even harder. If they cut rates to support growth, inflation gets worse. They're stuck. No matter which direction they move, something breaks. In the 1970s, policymakers faced the exact same dilemma. In the end, the only way out was a very painful one. The U.S. central bank pushed interest rates to extremely high levels in the early 1980s. This triggered 2 recessions and a big spike in unemployment, but it was the heavy cost required to finally bring inflation under control. So where does all of this leave us? Well, if we zoom out and look at Australia today, the picture is becoming harder to ignore. Inflation has picked back up, growth is barely moving, and productivity is still weak. We're not in full stagflation yet, but we're definitely moving closer to a stagflation-like environment. Slow growth on one side, stubborn prices on the other. And this isn't just happening here. The US and other major economies are seeing the same pattern. After decades of thinking stagflation was a thing of the past, the conversation is back. For investors, this matters. When interest rates stay high and the economy stays soft, leverage becomes riskier, returns slow down, and the old assumptions simply don't work anymore. That's why it's so important to understand the bigger picture and prepare early, not react after the fact. That's why now, more than ever, being cautious with leverage, stress testing your financial assumptions, and choosing investments with real resilience becomes critical. We can't control the macro environment, but we can control how exposed we are to it. Staying informed and planning ahead is the best way to protect yourself financially. Thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you in the next video.